The dust rose in slow, choking spirals above the auction yard, turning the afternoon light into a dull, gritty haze. Maria stood barefoot on the rough plank, wrists bound though she'd given no fight. Her dress, once a soft cream cotton her mother hand-stitched, hung torn at the shoulder, stained by travel and the sharp hand of those who had dragged her here. She kept her chin down, not in surrender, but because the eyes staring at her felt like knives pressed against tender skin. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Men leaning forward, boots shifting on dirt, hats pushed back to get a better look. "Barren," someone muttered. Parents gave her up themselves. A hollow ache spread through her chest, but she held her breath and steadied her gaze on the plank beneath her feet. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not here, not in front of men who measured her worth by the span of her hips or the softness of her face. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the heavy air. 18-year-old girl, strong enough for chores, quiet enough for a home, sold today to pay debts owed. A man in a black hat raised his hand. Another followed, then a third, his grin cutting crooked across his face, like someone had carved it with a dull blade. Maria didn't need to see the hunger in their eyes to know exactly why they bid. Not for help on a homestead, not for a wife, not for family. The price rose. Her heart dropped. When the hammer fell, everything inside her went still. The man who won her stepped forward. His boots were scuffed, but the knife on his belt gleamed sharp. He took her arm, his fingers digging so hard she winced. "Got plans for you," he said under his breath. That was the moment something cold and clear sliced through her fear. She wouldn't live a life given to monsters. She wouldn't let her parents' shame decide her fate. She waited, breathing shallow, listening to every shift in the yard. A wagon clattered by. A horse reared. A burst of shouting rose from another sale at the far end of the yard. A chance. She twisted. Hard. The man cursed. She tore free just long enough to leap off the plank, hitting the dirt so sharply her breath fled her lungs. She scrambled up, legs shaking, dress billowing behind her as she ran. Boots thundered after her. The rough scent of horses and sweat filled her senses. Heart hammering. She ducked between two wagons, then slid under a third, scraping her elbows on splintered wood. Men shouted. Someone grabbed her ankle. She kicked, wild and desperate, catching him in the jaw. He let go with a howl. She rolled free and bolted, dodging wheels, stepping over ropes, slipping past a woman carrying sacks of grain. Beyond the last wagon stood a hitching post with a dark bay horse tied loosely. She didn't dare steal it. That would get her shot dead. Instead, she darted into shadows behind an oversized freight wagon stacked high with crates. There, hidden between barrels and canvas, she found a half-open sack of dried apples. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but fear was stronger. The men searching for her walked past, boots striking the dirt inches from her hiding place. She held still, forcing every breath slow and silent. Minutes stretched until they felt like hours. Finally, the voices faded. Maria closed her eyes, letting the trembling settle. She knew she couldn't stay long. Darkness would come soon, and the plains at night belonged to coyotes, drifters, and things worse than the men who hunted her. She'd have to move before they circled back. But for now, she braced her hands against the wooden wall of the wagon and whispered, "I will not go back. I will not." The vow steadied her. It was the one thing she still owned. Jonas Hale had seen worse mornings, but not many. The fence on the southern stretch had collapsed sometime in the night, courtesy of the wind, or perhaps the stubborn mule that liked to scratch its hide against the posts. The twins were arguing again, their voices cracking the dawn like two crowing roosters. And the stew he'd left warming on the stove had burned into a black crust that smelled like punishment. "Pa!" Sam muttered from behind him, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. The boy was 14, tall for his age, quiet as a shadow. "I told Ben not to climb the fencing. He didn't listen." Ben, 8 years old and all mischief, kicked a loose stone. "It was already broken," he insisted. Lucy, 12, folded her arms. "You still shouldn't have done it." Emma, the youngest at 5, tugged Jonas's sleeve. "Pa, I'm hungry." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. His late wife, Claire, had managed all this chaos with a laugh and a steady hand. Jonas only managed it with sore muscles and a growing sense that the ranch was sinking under the weight of 4 children and one tired man. "All right," he said, forcing calm. "We'll fix the fence, then go into town for shoeing." Old Duke threw one in the night. Sam nodded. "I'll hitch the wagon." Ben brightened at the chance to travel. Lucy began sweeping the porch without being asked. Emma clung to her doll. Its face faded, its dress patched more times than Jonas could count. He watched them with a swell of affection wrapped tight in exhaustion. They deserved better. Claire should have been here. Life had taken her too soon, and Jonas still hadn't figured out how to fill the quiet spaces she left behind. By the time they rolled into town, a strange tension filled the air. Men huddled near the saloon door. A sheriff's deputy spoke in low tones to a group of ranch hands. Jonas slowed the wagon. "What's happening?" Lucy whispered. "Not our concern," Jonas replied, though his eyes lingered on the group. Words drifted toward him. Girl escaped auction. Worth money. He felt a twinge of unease. The world had its share of darkness, but he'd hoped today wouldn't involve any of it. He dropped the horse at the blacksmith's and stepped into the trading post to buy nails. Inside, more rumors swirled. Someone claimed the girl was dangerous. Another swore she was harmless but desperate. Each tale worse than the last. Jonas kept quiet, but the knot in his stomach tightened. Desperation made people dangerous, especially the ones hunting her. Maria had walked all night again, feet blistered, body aching. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the plain stretched behind her like an unending sea of brown and gold. She wasn't sure how she'd made it this far without collapsing. By the time the sun hung low and harsh, she finally gave into her weakness. Her legs buckled. She fell to her knees beside the road, dust rising around her like a dying sigh. For a long moment, she simply knelt there, head bowed, too tired to pray, too tired even to fear. A wagon's rumble reached her ears. She lifted her head. A team of horses drew closer, the wagon jostling over the ruts. The man driving it was broad-shouldered, his hat shading a face lined by sun, work, and grief. For children peered over the sideboards, their eyes full of curiosity. Maria tried to stand, but could manage only a half-rise before her vision blurred. The wagon halted abruptly. "You all right, miss?" the man called. Maria swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "Just tired. I'll move along." "You look like you'll drop again," he said, stepping down. She tensed. "I'm fine. Doesn't look that way." He reached for the canteen tied to the seat and held it out. She hesitated but took it, drinking slow. The water felt like life sliding down her throat. "Name's Jonas Hale," he said. "These are my kids." She nodded but didn't speak. The less she said, the safer she'd be. But then she heard it. Distant hoofbeats. Her heart clenched. She turned sharply, too sharply. Jonas caught the fear flashing in her eyes. "You running from someone?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. Too fast. Jonas's jaw tightened. Riders appeared on the horizon, dark shapes moving quickly. She backed away, panic choking her breath. "I need to go." Jonas didn't ask another question. He grabbed the tarp from the back of the wagon, lifted it, and gestured with a sharp nod. "Get in. Now." Maria didn't think. She dove inside, curling between feed sacks. Jonas dropped the tarp just as the riders reached shouting distance. He slapped the reins. "Hold on," he muttered to his horses. The team lunged forward. The wagon rattled violently, wheels throwing dust high behind them. Maria clung to the ropes, heart pounding as the thunder of hooves faded behind. Jonas didn't look back. Not once. And for the first time since she fled the auction yard, Maria allowed herself to hope. For a future not shaped by fear, but by the choices she made. A future that just might begin with the man who'd chosen to shield her without knowing her name. Rain slanted across the dusty plains, turning the ranch's dry earth into a slick, uneven mess. Maria crouched by the fire pit, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tepid water. The fire sputtered in the wind, sparks flying into the gray sky. Her dress, once cream, was now streaked with mud and streaks of rain. She shivered, not only from cold, but from the awareness that danger could strike at any moment. The distant howl of wolves carried across the plains, sharp and chilling, a reminder that the world outside Jonas's fence was wild, unforgiving, and always hungry. The children huddled closer to the flickering flames. Sam, 14, tall and silent, his brown eyes sharp, scanned the horizon with uncharacteristic vigilance. Lucy, 12, chestnut braids soaked and plastered her face, held her small knife tightly, not for offense, but for the illusion of safety. Ben, 8, restless and freckled, fidgeted with a stick, striking sparks from a rock. Emma, 5, the smallest and quietest, clutched a rag doll to her chest, eyes wide and tear-bright. They had all sensed the tension in Maria since she'd arrived, but tonight the fear was tangible, seeping into the wooden walls of the barn and into every breath Jonas drew. Jonas himself stood near the barn door, cloak soaked through, mud caking his boots. His eyes were dark, assessing, scanning the horizon where the wind carried a gray haze over plains. He had never been good at lying, nor hiding his thoughts, and yet he found himself keeping silent, allowing Maria to move among the children as she wished. But his mind was alive with unease. The rumors of men still hunting her had reached the edge of town, whispered in low voices at the blacksmith, over mugs of watered ale in the saloon. Now, with the storm pressing close, he could not ignore the possibility that those rumors would take shape tonight. The fire flared, illuminating Maria's pale face, the rain glistening on her damp hair. She moved to Emma, crouching low to meet the child's gaze. "It's all right," she said softly. Her voice, though gentle, carried authority, a silent command of attention. Emma's fingers curled tighter around the doll, but she leaned in. Maria's hand brushed the girl's wet hair back from her forehead. Sam and Lucy exchanged glances, wary but curious. Ben, ever bold, peeked around Maria's shoulder, fascinated by the calm assurance she radiated despite the storm and the unknown danger beyond their fence. Suddenly, a snapping sound echoed from the far corner of the pasture. Jonas's head jerked up, muscles tensed. The wolves, perhaps emboldened by the storm, had approached closer than usual. Rain whipped at their fur, as four forms slink along the edge of the fence line, eyes gleaming in the firelight. Jonas's hand rested on the worn butt of his rifle, but he did not raise it immediately. He waited, listening, calculating. Maria, beside him, clenched her jaw, her pulse quickening. She had never handled wolves before, but instinct stirred in her, a sharp, primal understanding of threat and survival. "Inside," Jonas barked. Short-clipped, the children obeyed instantly. Sam shut the barn door. Lucy tugged Emma behind the hay bales. Ben followed, and Maria stayed close to Jonas. The wolves approached, testing, their low growls vibrating through the air. Jonas stepped forward, shouting and clapping to drive them back, his stance firm, commanding. Maria moved as well, helping chase the beast toward the outer edge of the pasture. Sparks of fear mixed with adrenaline, the barn rattling in the wind as rain turned mud into deep-churned puddles. One wolf leapt, snapping at the edge of the fence, but Jonas swung a lantern, scattering it. They finally retreated, leaving the children trembling but unharmed. Maria's hands shook as she smoothed her wet hair from her face, but she did not let the fear show. The children clustered around her, sensing her strength more than Jonas's commands. Jonas exhaled heavily, mud dripping from his coat, and glanced at her. "You have courage," he said quietly. Maria met his gaze, a faint, tired smile crossing her lips. "Sometimes," she murmured, "courage is all we have." Jonas returned to town the next morning, the storm having passed, leaving the plains slick and glistening with mud and rain. The town smelled of wet wood and smoke, the air sharp with the scent of livestock and coal fires. He moved quickly through the streets, keeping his eyes low, listening to the whispers around him. Some men still asked about the girl. Others didn't bother, focusing on whiskey and work. Jonas, however, could feel the tension pressing in. Each shadow could conceal a threat. Each voice could carry the story of her flight back to those who would claim her. He found the blacksmith, a large man with a permanent smudge of soot across his cheek. "Horses ready?" Jonas asked, not looking around. The blacksmith nodded, hammering metal, eyes flicking to the doorway. "They've been asking," he said quietly. "About her." Jonas's jaw tightened. He didn't answer, only handed over coins. Outside, the horses snorted and shifted, their coats matted with rain. Jonas swung himself into the saddle, heart heavy, knowing he could not protect Maria if they found her tonight. The wind carried whispers of his thoughts, and the plain seemed alive with the echo of distant riders. He turned back to the town one last time, noting the glint of sunlight on metal, the shadowed alleyways where eyes watched for weakness. Back at the ranch, Maria had kept the children busy. Sam and Lucy helped prepare the fence, their hands strong and precise. Ben and Emma gathered firewood, laughing softly despite the gray sky. Maria guided them, showing patience she had never known she could muster. Each child's small victory, each plank set right, each laugh restored a fragment of warmth to her heart. Jonas returned later than expected, mud spattered across his coat, boots soaked. His face bore the strain of worry, but Maria was there, steady, strong, guiding his children in his absence. The wind began to pick up again in the late afternoon, carrying a scent of thunder and rain. Jonas and Maria worked together to secure the barn, their movements efficient, synchronized. Rain lashed at the roof, sending rivulets down the wooden walls. Maria's hands, though small, gripped the nails, held the hammer with precision. Jonas watched, noting her courage and quick thinking, the way she adapted to chaos. For the first time, he allowed himself a fraction of relief. She was not helpless. She was necessary, capable, and alive in a way that inspired the children. The storm broke fully by evening. Rain pelted the earth, thunder rolling over the hills like a distant drum. The children huddled in the barn, their small bodies pressed together, eyes wide at the sound of the rain and the occasional flash of lightning. Maria moved among them, soothing, steadying, whispering encouragement. Sam leaned against her shoulder. Lucy held Emma close. Ben peered out the small barn window at the wet darkness. Jonas leaned against the doorway, surveying the scene, heart-tight but proud. The house may have been battered, the plains wild and unforgiving, but here, in this moment, they were a unit held together by necessity and courage. Night fell heavy, the plains stretching endlessly beyond the fence. Rain had ceased, but the earth remained slick, and the wind carried a chilling promise of trouble. Jonas settled beside the fire with Maria, the children asleep under blankets on the hay. "You've done well today," he murmured. Maria smiled faintly, her hair damp and clinging to her face, the firelight reflecting in her hazel eyes. She thought of the auction, the men chasing her, the fear that had driven her across the plains, and realized she had found, however precariously, a place to belong. A sudden clatter from the far side of the barn jolted them both. Jonas's hand went instinctively to his rifle, muscles coiled. Maria rose slowly, silent, scanning the shadows. It was only Ben, fumbling with a loose board. Relief washed through them, but tension remained. Every sound in the wild had weight now, every shadow potential threat. Morning brought new sunlight, casting golden light across the wet, muddy plains. Jonas led the children outside for chores, Maria close at hand. The fence, though battered, stood firm. The barn doors were secure, and though the memory of wolves and the unknown threat of the men in town lingered, each child moved with a sense of resilience, their small victories mirrored in Maria's steady gaze. Sam worked with careful precision. Lucy observed keenly. Ben explored cautiously. Emma towered behind, always under watchful eyes. Maria guided them, teaching patience and skill, her past sorrow lending depth to her care. By evening, the storm had passed entirely, leaving the plains glistening in the last light. Jonas and Maria stood on the porch, watching the horizon. He no longer doubted her strength, her courage, her place in their lives. The children played in the yard, muddy, laughing, safe for the first time in days. And Maria, once sold and abandoned, felt the fragile stirrings of hope. The world beyond the fence remained dangerous, wild, unforgiving. But here, within this circle of mud, hay, and firelight, she had found a measure of family and the courage to face what might come next. The night had settled heavy over the ranch, a black velvet sky pierced with stars that offered no comfort. Maria lay awake on the rough mattress in the small guest room Jonas had prepared, her mind racing. Every sound outside, the creak of the barn, the whisper of the wind to the broken fence, the distant cry of coyotes, felt amplified, urgent, threatening. The past months of flight, fear, and exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight. Yet beneath the anxiety, a fire flickered. Jonas had offered her shelter, protection, and for the first time, something like family. But she knew the world outside was relentless. It would not forgive weakness, and tonight could be their test. Jonas moved quietly down the hall, boots muffled on the worn boards. He paused at the doorway, eyes scanning the shadows beyond. His children slept fitfully in the loft, for small forms curled beneath blankets. Sam, 14, tall and silent, stirred at the sound of his father's voice. Lucy, 12, chestnut braids matted with sleep, hugged her arms tight around herself. Ben, 8, freckled and restless, murmured in his sleep, hands twitching as if dreaming of some adventure. Emma, 5, small and fragile, clutched a rag doll, blue eyes wide behind closed lids. Jonas exhaled slowly. He had protected them before, but tonight felt different. The tension in the plains had grown thick, like the storm clouds that had passed only days before, leaving the mud slick and the air smelling of iron and wet earth. Maria joined him at the door, her dress damp from the night's chill, hair clinging to her temples. "Jonas," she whispered, voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "Something's coming. I can feel it." Her eyes were sharp, scanning the tree line beyond the fences, the open stretch of prairie illuminated faintly by starlight. Jonas studied her face, the shadows etched by the firelight in the hall highlighting determination that had been absent only weeks ago. He nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll face it. Together," he said, though the edge in his voice betrayed his own worry. They both knew the men who had chased her would not forget. They would not forgive. A rustle from the barnyard drew their attention. Jonas and Maria moved silently, boots sinking into the muddy earth, bodies low, hearts hammering. Through the darkness, the figures emerged. 3 men, riding hard, their horses' hooves striking sparks off the wet earth. They were far enough to remain silhouettes, but Jonas recognized a method in their approach. Not aimless, purposeful, predatory. The air smelled of tension, wet leather, and the distant flash of lightning. Maria's fingers curled, nails digging into her palms. Her heart thumped, steady and deliberate. She had survived worse. This night would not break her. Jonas signaled to the children quietly, guiding them to hide behind the stacked hay in the barn loft. Sam, Lucy, Ben, and Emma obeyed instantly, the fear in their young eyes tempered by trust. Maria stayed close to Jonas, crouched low, breathing in rhythm with him. The men rode nearer, dark shapes cutting through the moonlight. A rope snapped, and the horses whinnied, echoing across the plains. Maria's pulse quickened, but she did not flinch. Her mind raced, calculating, predicting every move. Survival had become instinct. Jonas whispered, "When they get closer, I'll call them off. Stay ready." He tightened his grip on the lantern, firelight reflecting in his eyes. Maria nodded, every muscle taut, every sense heightened. The men slowed their horses, their eyes scanning the barn as if sensing something hidden. One dismounted, boots squelching in the mud. Jonas shifted, stepping forward, lantern in hand, exposed his presence, the 4 children hidden safely behind him. Maria's hand brushed against his, a silent affirmation. They would not flee. They would face this together. The leader of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low, a scarf half covering his face, stepped closer. "Jonas, hail," he called, voice low and rough. "We're here for the girl. You can make it easy or we can make it hard." The others spread around, their eyes darting, hands near the reins. Rain from earlier had turned the ground into mud, making every step deliberate, measured. Jonas did not speak immediately, letting the silence stretch, the tension almost unbearable. Maria's gaze locked on the man's eyes, reading the threat, the expectation, the greed. She could feel the weight of her past pressing in, but she did not tremble. She had survived the auction block. She had outrun men with rifles. She would survive this. Jonas's voice cut the night. "Leave now, or you'll regret it," he said, calm but firm. Authority carried in every syllable. The leader laughed low, humorless, like a blade scraping across stone. "You think we care about regret? You're just one man. Hail! And the girl, she's worth more than you can imagine." The children stirred in the loft, suppressed whispers and shifting blankets echoing softly in the barn. Jonas glanced upward. For small faces, eyes wide with terror, yet holding trust in him and Maria. He drew himself taller, chest forward, body rigid. Maria's hand rested lightly on his arm, a signal that they were united, unbroken. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the entire barnyard. For a heartbeat, Maria saw the outlines of men, their rifles slung loosely but ready, the horses tense, nostrils flaring. And she saw something else. The raw courage that brought her here, her determination to not be owned, not be broken. This was her stand. Jonas's hand rested lightly on her back, a reminder of partnership, of shared risk, of survival. Together they could face this. She drew a slow breath, steadying herself, every nerve sharpened. Then the leader stepped forward, impatient. Jonas shifted, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. And yet, before anything could happen, Maria spoke. "You want her?" she called out, voice loud and steady. "She's not yours. She's not anyone's to take." Her words carried, cutting through the tension, bold, defiant. The children peeked from the loft, tiny heads barely visible, watching. The leader's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance at her audacity. Jonas moved beside her, hand brushing hers, silent solidarity. The night held its breath. A sudden shout from behind the riders. The wind carrying the sound startled the horses. Sam, unable to resist, had crept close at the loft's edge and called out instinctively to warn them. The moment shattered the stillness. The leader cursed. The men scrambled, and chaos rippled through the barnyard. Jonas moved swiftly, positioning Maria behind him, the lantern swinging to illuminate the nearest attacker. Maria's heart pounded. Fear was there, but so was resolve. She had a purpose now, a reason to fight beyond herself. The children watched, learning courage in real time. In the flash of lightning and clatter of hooves, the men recognized the unity of the small, unassuming ranch family. Jonas's stance, Maria's defiance, and the children's proximity, all a warning they could not ignore. They hesitated, the weight of their choices suddenly visible. Maria stepped forward, voice carrying again, firm, unwavering. "Leave, or face what you brought upon yourselves. We are ready." The leader's eyes flicked to the barn, assessing, calculating, knowing a misstep could cost more than they imagined. Slowly, deliberately, they mounted their horses, the threat lingering but retreating. Jonas exhaled sharply, muscles relaxing, but not fully. The danger had passed for now, but the night's lesson remained. The children emerged from the loft, trembling but unharmed. Sam's expression was sober, Lucy's wide-eyed, Ben's mouth slightly open in awe, and little Emma clutched her doll, still clinging to Maria's hand. Jonas looked at Maria, gratitude and admiration in his eyes. "You were incredible," he said quietly. Maria smiled faintly, exhausted but resolute. The firelight flickered across her face, highlighting the courage that had carried them all through. They had survived the night, together, unbroken. But each of them knew that the frontier demanded more than survival. It demanded strength, unity, and relentless courage. By dawn, the plains were calm again. The storm passed, mud drying under soft sunlight. Maria stood with Jonas at the fence line, the children beside them, small hands clutching tools in each other. For children, a man and a woman, improbable, unyielding, alive, looked out over the endless prairie. The auction, the chase, the wolves, the storm, and the men at the barnyard, all had tested them. All had forged them into a single unit, capable of facing whatever the frontier would throw next. Maria breathed in the sharp morning air, knowing that while danger would always loom, she was no longer powerless. She had found a family, a place, and herself.